Hi everybody. So you can thank Regina, one of my subscribers, for the content of this video, which is actually validating in a couple of different ways of the typology that we discuss in talking about the end times. There are a couple of different types and shadows that I discuss, and one of them is in the chart that I have here. This is on my academia page. It's called Biblical Events Overlaying World History. And I'm going to go through a couple of things real quick to hit on some comments that I've gotten recently. We'll start with the comment that led me here, though, and then we will digress into a couple of the other comments that I have received because the information is found on this chart. This is by far the most comprehensive timeline chart that I have. And it brings full circle everything respective to Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy to bear to help us understand timing. But she said, "Hey Heather, I just realized that the 573 BC Jubilee was the 70th Jubilee since creation." That's the part that I had not investigated, and so I'll show you the truth of that. But this came as a result of the video that I did yesterday, Prophetic Teamwork. Ezekiel's End Times Vision, which is chapters 40 through 48, with help from Daniel and John and Isaiah, as kind of a side note that I made at the end of that video. But when I pulled up the chart yesterday, it was from the Comprehensive Jubilee Timeline, which is also another chart that I have on my page. And it only takes you from entrance into the Promised Land, which is if 1406, then 2025. And one of the questions that I've gotten repeatedly is, how do we know 70 Jubilees? Because that's the context of Daniel 9. From the beginning to the end, there will be 70 Jubilees plus the 70th week of years. But I usually only say from 1406 to the end, because that's actually when the Sabbath cycles commenced. That is when and the Sabbath cycles are what the Jubilee is built upon. So you wouldn't start at creation. Although you can use the same method of counting forward to count backward and approximate creation in the likeness of the Sabbath cycles. But because they're based on plus or minus 49, which is evidenced in so many of my videos, if you have a dispute with that, take it to the Lord or take it to another channel. Because I've got like half a dozen videos in the last 10 days to dispute the 50 and show you the 49s. So if you guys are still hung up on that point, you are beyond my help. Sorry, but I'm not going to continue replaying that conversation. I have lots of recent videos. Go look at them. But regardless, if 1406, then 2025, we count plus or minus 49 to get to the 50th year, minus 49 as you count down closer to AD, and then plus 49 once you get to AD. And I show you the transition from BC to AD here so that you can see that I don't include a year zero because I'm counting Gregorian calendar years. So when we start from the correct spot, which is when Israel comes into the land, and you count forward, there are 70 from commencement to conclusion, and then also the 7 years for the 70th week. But again, you can use the same method of counting backward to approximate the approximately 6,000 years of world history. We don't count by 50s, we count by 49, so getting to an exact 6,000 is not going to be possible. Also have lots of videos about that, specifically one called, Are There Exactly 6,000 Years of World History? So if you're going to dispute that too, go watch that video or take it somewhere else because we've already been through this. But the question that she brought up was something that I hadn't considered because I usually just start from 1406 and count forward. And while I do have this, and we go through the typology, which I will go through in this video with you again to underscore the point, but 70 is such an important number. 70, 40, and 7 are such important numbers in the book of Exodus. I actually started this year by going through the book of Exodus to bring in the new year. Started on New Year's Eve, and then New Year's Day we went through the entire book, and we noted every time that there was an occurrence of the number 70 or 40 or 7. And what we find is that when we go back to approximate creation using the method of counting Jubilees, there are going to be 123, and there will be 6,034 years of world history. There is a reason for that beyond the scope of this video, though. One of the types and shadows that we can use to give an overview of world history is from the giving of the law on Sinai, the law being a foreshadow of Christ. And it's actually a foreshadow of both his first coming and his second coming through the book of Exodus from chapter 19 through the end, and then into the book of Joshua from chapters 4 through 13. You have a benchmark event of the giving of the law, Exodus 19. And then Moses was up the mount for 40 days to receive the tables of stone handwritten by the finger of God. When he descended the mount, they thought that the camp was being invaded, but it was just people dancing around the golden calf, having naked orgies and being bad. So the first day down the mount was the command to give the Levites. They slew about 3,000 people that day. The next day, Moses was interceding for the people because God was going to take his spirit away from Israel, wouldn't continue in the wilderness with them. And Moses was interceding on behalf of the people for God to not take his spirit away. So he said, okay, I won't, but you're going to come back up the mount, do a do-over. Moses was back up the mount for a period of 40 days. When he came down, his face was shining like the sun from being in the presence of God. That's a preview of the time in actual world history where the transfiguration would occur of the glorified Christ, where Moses and Elijah would appear with Jesus. So it's just kind of interesting. And then the 40 here is their period of wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. Until such a time as on the 10th day of the first month, they came up out of the Jordan and camped in Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. That's when they entered their promised land. There was a 7-year conquest for the land of Canaan, after which the land rested for war and the lots were parceled to the tribes in the kingdom, in the promised land rather. So what you have here is from Exodus 19 and the giving of the law and the events in the book of Exodus and Joshua, you have a precise overlay and type and shadow of world history. So I noticed that quite a bit of time ago because this chart has existed for years, but I hadn't considered if we count from the first Jubilee. So this is the creation. So the first Jubilee would be 3954 if you use the plus or minus 49s to count. And what Regina said is, I just realized that 573 BC Jubilee was the 70th Jubilee since creation. And indeed it was. If you count, so there's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, and then 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70. 573 BC is the 70th Jubilee from creation. And in 573, we have the vision of Ezekiel prophesying about what will occur on the 70th Jubilee from the actual commencement. So this is fascinating, and I will say thank you to her. I actually responded to her comment at like 4 something in the morning, and I read this, and I said, I don't know if that's true or not, because Jubilees don't actually start at creation, can project them backwards, but I didn't check it out, and this is the first time I've had an opportunity to check it out. So it honestly was so super cool, and she's so excited right now. So I wanted to give her a shout out and say that is amazing. I'm going to take you through the other chart, just a real brief glimpse of what I showed in the video that she was commenting on, of the other chart where I used to calculate Jubilees, and show that the 573 is the foreshadow of the final Jubilee year, which is where Ezekiel's temple will be involved. I realize that this is going to be very small on your screen, but it's not intended for you to get a close-up of this. I'm just showing you the chart where I usually use to calculate all of the data points. And Ezekiel's vision, coming from Ezekiel 40 verse 1, in the 5 and 20th year of our captivity, in the beginning of the year, the 10th day of the month, the 14th year after that the city was smitten, the selfsame day the hand of the Lord was upon me and brought me thither. He took him to Mount Moriah to look down upon the city of David, where the temple is going to be built, and then he gave him the dimensions of the temple. So Ezekiel, based on Ezekiel 40 verse 1, we can pinpoint the receiving of his vision to the 10th day of Nisan in a Jubilee year. And he's prophesying about the underpinnings of the Daniel 9:27 covenant, which if you go back and watch this video that I did last night, which I just referenced a second ago, the prophetic teamwork of Ezekiel, Daniel, and John, also Isaiah, going through Ezekiel 40 verse 48, I explained all of this, but it's just interesting to note that the Jubilee, which gives the measurement for his temple, the year in which he received the vision, is prophetic of the final, which is the 70th. So you take that back to this chart, you in fact see that if you expand the Jubilee timeline back to creation, 573 BC was indeed the 70th Jubilee from creation, which is a foreshadow of the 70th Jubilee from the establishment of them, which is if 1406, then 2025. So that is fascinating, and I will say thank you to Regina. So that's one of the types and shadows is from the book of Exodus, the entire overlay of provided by the pattern in the mount. From the giving of the law to the entrance into the promised land, through the conquest, and then the parceling of the lots to the tribes. When we take this over here to this other part that I've got, I am also not going to continue arguing about this whole 32 AD thing. It does not cause me any problem for people to think that there is a different year for the crucifixion. You are welcome to your own beliefs. I am not required to share them, just as you are not required to share mine. But the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince. The going forth of the commandment was given in the 20th year of the reign of Artaxerxes. He began his reign in 465 BC. The 20th year is, it would be the fall to fall, 446 to 445. The month Nisan is in the 445 part of that. And so I don't know why people would have a different opinion than this, but it is what it is, and you guys can think whatever you'd like. Counting on a 360-day calendar and converting that to the Gregorian afterward, it's the 173,880 days. It takes you to 32 AD. One of the other comments I got was that can't be right because the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius. Okay, well, that's already built in here. Tiberius began his reign in 14 AD. The 15th year would be 28 AD. Nisan 10 of 32 AD, triumphal entry, which is unto the Messiah the Prince, which is what we locate in the chart I just showed you in the upper right corner of this. Minus 3.5 years is Tishri 10 of 28 AD, which would correlate directly to the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius, which is when John the Baptist began his ministry, and that was very, very proximately to when Jesus came to be baptized and thus began his ministry. So I get that there are people who have other opinions. Great, you can have whatever opinion you want. Doesn't affect me whatsoever. But just because you have that opinion does not mean I'm going to change my opinion because your opinion is not more valuable than my opinion since I've done all this research. But you're welcome to it. And I'm not discounting that you are able to have whatever opinion you want. I'm simply saying I'm not required to share it, nor do I if it is something other than 32 AD. And we have additional validation of the 70s and the Jubilee timeline based on the overlay of the pattern in the mount and the 70s. So it's just phenomenally interesting. And I'm not one who really looks forward to hearing other people saying, this is a typology of this, or this is a foreshadow of this, because people reach, people stretch, and people entertain very strange ideas. However, this is not one of those such things. This is actually meaningful. And the meaning behind this is phenomenal. So I'm going to thank Regina for this. She asked, did I see that correctly? It seems like another confirmation if it's correct. Yes, the 70th Jubilee from creation was 573 BC, which is the vision of what will occur in the 70th Jubilee from the actual commencement, which is if 1406, then 2025. It's the 70s. And I hadn't looked at that before, so I'm grateful that she did, and she's super excited. So she said, yay, I might have actually had a Holy Spirit prompted thought. This is very humbling, but also exhilarating. So yeah, good for her. Good for you, Regina. And thank you for sharing that with me. And I am going to share this with the rest of you because it is very interesting. So I got this chart, Biblical Events Overlaying World History. It's out there for everybody to review. Very comprehensive. Got lots of dates and all the corresponding scripture on it to show you how I arrive at my conclusions. Again, you are not required to agree with me. That is fine, but there is not a single person in this whole entire world that is going to make me move from my position because it is extensively and exhaustively researched. So it is what it is. Agree to disagree. Live and let live. You do you, I'll do me, and never the twain shall meet. But thank you, Regina, for this. Very, very interesting, and yes, another validation of the 70s and the importance of the 70s. And then there is one more thing that I will say before I leave. I was almost going to forget, but This is the period of 40 since Christ came. It's very interesting, and I discussed this when I went through my Mark chapter 1 and chapter 2 studies. So if you want more information, please go check those out. Very, very interesting. The first thing that Jesus did when he began his ministry on Tishri 10 of 28 AD was baptize, and then he went into the wilderness for 40 days to fast, and then he was tempted of the devil. That 40 days of fasting was a foreshadow of the 40 Jubilees that we will be without Christ. That is specifically what he talks about in Mark 2. So you find his 40 days of fasting in Mark 1, and you find the period of time prophesied in Mark 2 that the bride shall be without her bridegroom. That is a period of 40 of fasting from the presence of the bridegroom. Very specific language that Jesus uses in Mark 1 and Mark 2 to draw parallels. So he began his ministry with 40 days of fasting, and the bride will be fasting from the presence of her bridegroom for a period of 40 before he returns. And that's why Paul says in 1 Thessalonians, and so shall ye ever, 1 Thessalonians 4 of the rapture, and so shall ye ever be with the Lord. The rapture of the church is the time when the bride will no longer fast from the presence of her bridegroom, because that's when he comes to get us and take us to the Father's house to bypass the events of the 7 years of the 70th week. There are so many types and shadows, so much typology. However, simply because types and shadows and typologies exist does not mean that every idea that people have is valid. And that's where I'm going to, I draw the line. Not specifically with the 70s. Again, that was such a great thing from Regina. I'm saying in general, simply because people can use any way to link things to things does not automatically give them credibility or validity or make them correct. But there are types and shadows that do exist, and here are just a few of them in this video. So again, we thank Regina. If you see her in comments, give her a thumbs up and a like. And we do appreciate this, so I wanted to share. If you guys have any questions, let me know. But if you're just going to dispute my counts based on some other thought that you have, think twice, because there's no value in that. There's no value in that. Nobody here is going to change their mind. So if you're trying to change minds or just fight your fight, there's no point. Have a good day.